Hello everyone, welcome to what I think is the fourth installment now of building this game from scratch. Last time, as some of you may know, we had quite a lot of problems working out this one feature that we're trying to get done currently, where we're trying to smooth out voxels and make them kind of look a little bit less janky and a little less, well, blocky, I suppose. And this time we're trying to fix that same problem. There's some code changes that I've done off camera, but to show you what I mean by problems, we had this issue where it was only recognizing certain types of elevation changes, and then it wasn't always using the right block in the right place. So today we're going to try and diagnose that, work out why it's doing what it is. And hopefully we can fix it. So like here for example, like that's kind of working but maybe not quite in the right place. It's not fully symmetrical either. These ones aren't the right, well, they're not matching essentially. This one isn't the same as this block over here, and so on. Like there's loads of odd inconsistencies about this whole thing, and we need to go through and find out why. So I guess what we'll do is we'll just go through step by step in the program's kind of running order of the feature that we're trying to develop, and we'll see if anything stands out, if there's anything that we can really fix that's obvious. I don't think there is, because I've been through it many times, but you never know, we might spot something. And as I go through it, I'll show you what changes I've made off of stream, just to make the process a little bit nicer, a little bit easier. So before we begin with that, I just want to say, I've cleaned up the header file a little bit, so it does look a little bit different. Removed some unused variables, initialized these arrays just in case that was causing problems. It wasn't, but no, it's worth a try. Renamed a few of these functions and reduced the requirement for certain parameters to be passed in, since we're already storing the data that was originally put into them up here. Also now, I believe it's update model no longer calls update rotation, because it shouldn't be doing that directly. That should be the job of spawn voxel model instance. And also these have had a rename as well, so they're more consistent. Same with these two, these have had a rename, just so that they're a bit more distinguishable and descriptive and you know what they do. Yes, they're a bit long for function names, but that's not always necessarily a bad thing. And it's just easier for me when looking through to say, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want and this is what I need to use. So with that out of the way, if I go through to smooth cube, or rather no, I'll go through to change voxel ellipsoid, since this is what we're testing. This is where we've had issues so far. This is the root kind of starting point for the issues that we've been having. So this is a simple check if voxel smoothing. That's just a settings toggle up here, which is always true, at least for now. It will be false by default, but until we've got the editor in, we can't change that externally, so it's true by default currently. So this should always run, which it does. And I've double checked this parameter list here. All of the maths for this seems to be correct. All we're doing for these parameters is we're passing in, we're basically just passing in the range that we should be searching across to smooth out the blocks in. So in this case we're taking a big cube around the ellipsoid that we've just made, and then adding 1 to that. So this formula, yeah, it looks a bit odd, but it's basically just saying we're taking the center, we're using the diameter, we're taking the diameter off of that just to give us a range around it, and then we're adding 1. And that's just our search space basically, and all of these variables are, I believe, correct. There's nothing that stands out really. We're using all of the x variables for the first two, all of the Y variables for the second two, all of the Z variables for the last two. That's fairly standard. Nothing that stands out, let's put it that way. One quick thing I have noticed is we're using diameter here instead of radius. It won't actually have an effect on the bug that we're currently looking at, but that will be something I need to quickly change. So I'll do that now as we go through. So this is just a simple copy and paste job, nothing fancy. It's just basically saying that we're taking the center point plus you know, half of the circle's width or depth or height, rather than the whole width or depth or height. And then we're adding 1 to that just so we've got a bit of buffer room around it for any voxels that are touched by the brush, essentially. Right, so that's done now. That should be working fine. I'll just do a quick test just in case I've broken anything. Shouldn't have done, but it's always worth being safe. Give it a quick play. It is a bit slower now because I've expanded the size of the ellipsoid, so it's spawning in more objects on start, which is why it seems to take so long to start up now, but that's just so I can get a better idea of the different edge cases for my circles and stuff like that. If I turn lighting off you can see it, so yeah, same as before, no issues. Still touching all of the outer blocks, so we know that that change that we've just made is working now. So I guess that takes us then on to Smooth Cube itself. So this function should iterate over every voxel that we've placed using the previous brush and check all of the adjacent blocks, well not quite all of them but most of the adjacent blocks, and see if it should change its own shape to better, I guess, fit its kind of surroundings. So I'll give you an example. So you might have a cube surrounded by more cubes, and so the ones that are around that cube would then potentially decide to either change into these ramp blocks or these corner blocks, so that we get kind of a nice little hill as opposed to just a large rectangle or something. So going back to the code, we have this bit here. It's not too important, we don't need to worry too much about it. All this is doing is making sure that we're not, when we're adding 1 here, it's basically just saying, you know, don't expand your search radius larger than the world itself, so that we're not getting any read access violations with our arrays. It's not reading out of bounds or anything like that, and it knows where its relative relative frame of reference is, and it's not overstepping any of the world boundaries at all. So that's all that does. It essentially just narrows this search range if it's out of bounds, which is fine. It does what it's supposed to. I have made a note here that I need to do the same thing when individually accessing adjacent voxels, so that we're not, say, you know, checking voxel 0, 0, 0 and checking -1, -1, -1. So that wouldn't make any sense. But that's a bigger job for another day, and we're not triggering any issues currently, so I've made sure that the ellipsoid is not against any borders, so that we're not running into any of those issues right now. So the next step after we've set these variables is to run the for loop that just iterates over every voxel. This is fairly straightforward. There's nothing fancy about the for loops, it's just literally searching through every one. This is where it starts to get a little bit difficult and a little bit abstract, but this is the start essentially of the smoothing process. Like, this is all the setup for it, and this is where the smoothing actually takes place. So for doing deformations on the top half of the block, first of all we need to make sure that the position above it is actually air, so that we're not changing things that are, say, surrounded by other blocks, because you can't see them anyway and it wouldn't make sense to make them like non-solid. So we're first checking that, making sure that there's air above it, but we're also making sure that it has a block underneath it. Now this is excuse me, this is just like designer preference, but it basically just means that you can't just have a single block floating in the air and then that be deformed. It'll stay defaulted to whatever it was previously. This part of the if statement could be turned off and it wouldn't have any adverse effects, but it would give a slightly different result for certain scenarios. And that's just checking the one underneath, just making sure that there is a material present, because if the material's 0, then it means it's air or it's nothing, so that's fine. So the meat of the smoothing itself relies on adjusting an array with essentially a variable for each of the corners on that cube. So obviously we've got corners 1 through to 4 for the top half of the cube itself. The 4-dimensional array, we're saying each corner corresponds to a number here. And then for each of those corners, we're then going through each array space and assigning it a number based on the average height of adjacent cubes. So I'll show you what I mean by that, because it's kind of hard to explain at first glance, but hopefully it makes sense. So let's say we're on corner 0, which in my case I've set it up to be the front left corner, so the corner closest to you on your left. First of all, what we do is we see if the cube to the left of that is greater than 0, so if it's occupied, and if it is, then it's also one level higher as well, so it's basically saying there is an incline in that direction. And if there is, then we're incrementing the offset for that corner. So we're saying this has, in this instance, +1 height. So we know that, if it's used in the future, that corner would be raised, or could be raised for visual effect like we're trying to do now. If this isn't true, then we say, okay, well, if it's not raised, is it potentially lowered? We don't need to worry about if it's flat, because that's just a default amount, and we don't need to make any changes to anything there. So this one then says, okay, well, if for the same column position, is there anything immediately next to me? Or rather, is there not anything immediately next to me? Which is what we mean by using 0. So we're saying, if there's not something immediately next to the cube that I'm currently looking at, then we know that, well, not only is there not an incline, there's also not something on the same level, therefore it must be like either a drop-off or a lowered ramp on that side, like yeah, so it's basically saying, okay, the average height for that corner adjacent to it is -1. And we do that for each of the 3 blocks that touch that corner's edge. So that will be the left cube in this case, the one diagonally to it, and the one closer to the camera if we are looking at it from a standard like point of reference on a grid or something. And we know that that's the case based on where these offsets are for the X, Y, and Z position. So X minus 1 is left, Y minus 1 is closer to you, Z+1 is just the part of the column that we're checking. And then we can see, where is it? X is on the same x-axis. Y-1 is towards you again. So we're checking the 3. And we're incrementing or decrementing each time, depending on what is or isn't there in that kind of local stack. And that we've kind of done for every corner, but each offset position is ever so slightly different. Like here, for example, it's positive instead of negative, because we want to see, on this corner, we want to see to the right instead of the left. Same principle applies to the rest of them. Like, they're all pretty much the same. I've double checked this and triple checked it, and I'm almost certain that the offsets in these are not the issue, which I originally thought would be the case. It's the most obvious thing that could be the culprit, but for whatever reason that isn't the issue, I don't think. There might still be something I've not spotted, but I have quite thoroughly checked it so far. I will check it again if I have to at some point. But yeah, as far as I can tell, this isn't the problem. So moving on to the last part of this, what we need to do is say, okay, now we're taking the offset tally that we've just made, and we're saying, is it greater than or equal to 0? If it is, we want to just set it at a baseline of 0. We don't want it to be like, you know, +3 or something if it's raised on all sides, because 0 just tells us that, yeah, it's in the positive direction, or at least neutral in the way that it's currently set up, but that will be edited slightly later to allow neutral raised and lowered, but that's a bit more involved. So right now it's just saying don't make any changes. But if it's less than 0, then set it automatically to -1. Again, so that we're not getting things like -2 or -3, so we don't want that. We just want to say, yes, it's going down in this direction. And then it returns that back up to where the function was called and places it in the relevant part of the array that it's supposed to be placed into. Right, so from that point on, we've got all four corners, and we know whether or not each one is higher or lower. So now what we need to do is we need to take that information and find a way to decide what shape to use in its place, now that we know roughly what type of context that voxel is placed into, I suppose. So to do that, we're first creating just an ID variable saying this is the new shape that we want. We're initializing it as the original shape for that voxel and the original rotation for the rotation variable, just so that if we don't end up making any changes to that brush position, like that voxel position, it defaults to what was already there previously. That's just so that we don't get any odd results, or say we make a brush that paints loads of ramps, it doesn't then accidentally revert it to like regular cubes, which wouldn't be the intended result. And these are passed in by reference, I believe. So any data that is changed as a part of these parameters should feed straight back into these variables in this scope. So we'll go through to this part, because this is another potential problem area. But again, I've checked it and I can't see anything obviously wrong. So we'll go through, once I've explained both of these, we'll go through quite thoroughly and see if we can spot anything that maybe isn't quite right or logically doesn't quite make sense, and see if we can fix it. But to explain what this does is it simply, like, ignore this for loop for now, I'll explain the basics in a second, but we've taken the pattern that we've made for each four of the corners, and we're saying, okay, is one, in this case, are one of the edges lowered? And if that is the case, then we know that the shape is the second one that we've got in our ID system, which I believe is this block here. So you can see that one of the corners is lowered. Same for the other ones as well. In this case we've got 3 of the corners being lowered, and that should correspond to shape 3, which is here. 3 corners are lowered. And again for the final one we've got 2 corners being lowered here. Then we know it's shape 4. Shape 1 I believe is reserved for just the standard cube, but since it defaults to a cube anyway, we don't necessarily need to take into account, although saying that I've just realised that if we're using a brush with ramps for example, we would need that conditioning. So what I'm going to do now is add one of those cases in just so you can see what the process looks like for that. So we know that one scenario where that might happen is where it's all negatives, in which case there's no obvious direction to ramp into, so we'll just say, okay, shape is 1. There is another instance where that can happen though, and that is if everything is 0. So we'll just say, you know, if it's 0 in this instance, then yeah, again, shape is 1. Now I'll explain what this I is and what the for loop is for. So down here, what we're doing is once we've done one successful run through, if we haven't found a pattern, or if we have found a pattern, it like doesn't really matter. Like if this is used for if there's not a pattern that's been found by this system. Maybe there's an edge case I've not caught, or maybe it is the same pattern just shifted along. So it might be that we do have one corner raised, but rather than being in this position here, it's in this position. So to solve that issue, we're shifting all of our corner offsets one place. We're saying, okay, let's store the last of them. We've got that stored, and then we're overwriting the last of them with the third with the second with the first with the temp variable which we made, which was the last one, and then we're looping back round and we're checking again. So it's equivalent to rotating the object round and seeing if it fits any of those patterns that we've got stored. And that is how basically we don't care whether or not we've inputted it in like a standard format or anything like that. It's just we check these theoretical shapes that we've got in each of the 4 rotations, and if it matches any of the patterns, we set the shape and we set the rotation. And the rotation is just simply how many times it's looped through, and then in the set rotation function it knows that 1 is equivalent to 90 degrees, 2 is equivalent to 180 degrees, and so on. So it's basically just, yeah, again, shifting it around by 90 degrees each time. And that's I think this is the simplest way I could have done this. I think it's probably more complicated or better methods, but it would have involved, like, one such thing I could have done is duplicated each one of the, say, this pattern, and then shifted it each time and just duplicated it for every case. But while it may be more efficient in some cases, it would be very difficult to maintain. I don't know what would be more efficient in this case really, but one thing for sure that I get performance benefits out of this, so doing it this way is quite nice. So again, like, I've had a look through this function, nothing stands out as being the problem. So now that I've explained that, let's jump back up. So now we've called this, we're done with this function. We've set our new shape, we've set our new rotation, and this is where we apply any changes that we've made. So we say if the new shape is different from the existing one, so if any changes need to be made, or if the rotation is different, so again, if any changes need to be made, we change that voxel at the XYZ position that we're checking, We pass in the existing material because we don't want the material to change. We just want its physical properties to change. And then we're passing in the new shape and the new rotation. And that will just go through to the instantiation methods that we've already built and I've already shown you in other parts of the video series that we've done. So I, for the life of me, right now, cannot figure out why we're getting such strange results. So now that I've shown you that whole thing, let me go back into the editor and we'll take another look at the results we're getting and see if anything stands out logically that might give us some clues as to what the bug might be. Because it does seem to be consistent. It seems to populate the same shapes every time, which makes me think it isn't like failing to write data to the right place. Like, it isn't a memory issue or anything like that. So pretty sure it's a logic problem. It's just pinning down exactly what that logic problem is, which is difficult. So the most confusing part to me, anyway, is that let's take these two edge shapes. Now, given the system that we've built, these edge shapes should, in theory, be the same. They should be the same shape. Like, there's no reason that I can tell for these to be different, and yet they are. Now, we know that some bits of the other code are working, like the checking up and down to make sure that there's something below it and there isn't something above it, because we're not getting any of the middle shapes changing. So that's great, like we've eliminated that problem. But the question still remains, like, what on earth is going on to the rest of it? So this block, for example, I would expect to have changed, and yet it hasn't. Other blocks have changed, but they're in the wrong rotation. Like, that's fine. I can live with the wrong rotation for now, because that's just a simple either code adjustment or model adjustment. It's the different models which are confusing me currently. So, and there's also something else that I thought was quite interesting, and that there seems to be a massive lack of changes on one side of the shape. So this side seems to be quite heavily populated with ramps and such. Like, there's a nice healthy bit of distribution on that side and down here, but less so on here, less so on the back, and basically none at all on this side, which makes me think that maybe I'm searching through the array incorrectly, or I'm not checking the right sides. Like, maybe it's saying, okay, let's have a look at this one. Oh, there's something up here. Let's not change anything. But that wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense given what I've just shown off. So that being said, if we take a close look at some of these, there might be something obvious. Seems like maybe one of the corners isn't getting checked properly, but I couldn't be certain. This block here does actually make sense, it being different, and that's just because there isn't a block here, so that's an edge case that I'll need to solve once the rest of it is sorted. And then obviously this one is kind of the same deal, but it's a different shape again, which is really curious. So maybe different sides are registering different up and down variables, which would point to this function being the culprit. I just sort of thought of something obvious that we could do just to eliminate a few factors. So wrapping like this, for example, in brackets would probably help. just so that we're at least clear, like the compiler probably already knows what we're doing here, but just so that we're clear on what's actually getting checked. Let's do that. And it's going to be one of those things that's quite tedious, unfortunately, so we've got to go through and do it for each one. But it might yield some results. Wish there was a faster way to do stuff like this, to be honest. Easy to get tripped up as well while you're doing repetitive tasks. It just makes it that much more difficult. Like that, putting a 9 instead of a bracket. So just the last two now. Sorry for this taking so long, but we'll get there eventually. I'm still kind of undecided yet on like when these go to YouTube, which they will eventually, whether or not I should do any editing. Like, part of me is tempted to just upload them in their raw form so that I don't accidentally cut something out and then it makes no sense, because these are like 3-hour live streams, you know, I can't edit the whole thing all the time, it's going to take forever to do that. So part of me is tempted to just upload it in its entirety, but then another part of me is like, some bits might not be the most entertaining thing in the world to watch, but I guess that's not really the point of these tutorials, or not tutorials, but this video series. It's more to show you what programming is actually like day to day, and hopefully get some kind of input on that and like collaboration on this project specifically, which would be super cool. I'll see if this simple changes made any difference. It might have been like evaluating its conditions slightly incorrectly. Right, so let's go again to unlit mode so we can see what we're doing. So exactly the same results. That's not made any difference, but at least now we're a bit more clear on, as a programmer, what those things are and how it's working. So yeah, back to it. So let's go up here. This is again the kind of most obvious potential issue. So let's look through each of this and go through the tedious process of making sure we're actually checking the right blocks and we're checking what we think we are. So this might take a while, but hopefully it will get faster as we go down. So the first and most obvious thing is to check the block to the left of the current block that we're on, and it's the one that's above it. So we're checking if there's an incline, if a block exists that we can incline to. And if there is, we add to it. Now here we're doing the same again, but in a Z position down. Now this is just the same Z position that we're currently looking from, but we're just looking left and we're seeing, does something exist there? If not, we know that something doesn't exist above it, and we know that therefore it's lowered, so we can decrement. So we know that logic's correct. The kind of path through of the if statements itself is sound, like it actually makes sense. Now we just need to go through each one and make sure that we're actually checking the correct block. So like doing a quick scan down, all of the if statements seem to be basically identical. I don't see any changes there, so I think they're fine. So now let's look at the positions we're checking. So down here we're checking the leftmost again, And the X is in the same position for the last one, which is fine because that's just the one, rather than it being left, we're checking the one closest to us. So that forward left, or I guess it would be backwards, the backward left corner. But backwards is in closest to us, if that makes sense. And yeah, again, we're checking. We've checked one that's in line with the y-axis, one that's close to the y-axis, and again close to the y-axis. So that's fine. Same process for this, but this time it's on the right-hand closest corner rather than the left-hand. So it's pretty much the same thing, but I think the x-axis should be reversed, and the y-axis should be slightly different. So we're checking the closest one again. We're checking the closest right-hand one. That's fine. Again, closest right-hand one. Then we're checking the right-hand one, and it's not closer or further away. And again, right-hand one, that's fine. Case 2. We're checking the right-hand one again, because we need to check the same position but for a different corner. This is the corner at the front of the object now on the right-hand side. So that's the right, that's the right. This is the front right, so this is diagonally from the object. Same again. Then we're doing it in line with the block, we're checking in front of it. That's fine. Now for the third one, we've not seen any issues up here, so this has to be where the issue is if it is within this function. We're checking the left hand, well, we're checking the front here, and then the left hand front, and then the left hand, yeah, the left hand block from that position. So yeah. No obvious problems. Let's see if the logic for this holds up. So if we end up with a net positive or net neutral, then return 0, flatten it out, because we don't care about positives right now. We're just seeing if there's a way we can take away, because like these blocks don't have variants where the baseline starts halfway up and then raises on one side. Like that is something that potentially will go into effect with some block variants. Like there's a diagonal ramp that has both a lowered half and a raised half. So that is something that we will need to take into consideration at some point, and that's where that modification of this line will come into play. But until then, we're just checking it like this. So if it isn't neutral or positive, if it's not greater than or equal to, we return -1. We know that it's negative, and we know that that corner should be lowered down. Okay, so that function, gone through it properly now, shouldn't be the problem. There shouldn't be anything wrong with that. So now the most obvious next culprit that could be the problem is this function. But since this doesn't really handle any positioning as such or anything like that, I can't see why it might be the issue, unless I don't know, like maybe it's not shifting stuff properly. That would be my first thought or instinct. Like maybe it's not shifting the bits around correctly on every loop pass. So we start off with a rotation of 0, like there's no changes that need to be made, and then we increment that, I believe, 3 times. So we're saying 0, so 0, 1, which would be 90, 2 would be 180, 3 would be 270. So maybe we just need to add an additional rotation. Yeah, so we're checking different states, but that wouldn't explain all of the weird results that we're getting. So we'll compile that again and we'll see if that's made any change at all. It might have fixed a couple of things, but I honestly don't think it's that big of an issue. Maybe it places some additional objects in the scene, or rather some additional changes. So let's test that quick. Wait for it to load up again. There we go. No, same rough result, I think. I don't think there's anything majorly different there. I can't spot anything obvious, so no, same problem. Go back to the code again. I'll leave that as 4, just in case. Anyway, it's probably something that we need in there regardless. Then we're checking 4 states of rotation as opposed to 3, which makes sense. I think I changed that back a while ago and forgot to revert it. Okay, so let's test our shifting thing. Let's rewrite this just in case we've done something slightly different. I don't know, through rewriting it we might solve the problem. So we've got int. Let's just call it temp corner val. There we go, temp corner val. Make that equal to first one. So we'll just copy this, makes life a bit easier if we've got something on the clipboard. So now that's equal to the first one, so that we've saved the first one, so that when we overwrite it, which we can do now, we haven't lost it necessarily, and we can use it later until we no longer need it. So done the same here. We've assigned position 1 to position 0, so now we can overwrite position 1. Save again. And last but not least, we need to say position 3 is equal to the original position. But in this case it would be temp corner val, since we've saved it as a temporary variable. I think that basically looks identical. When I was messing around, I reversed the order of these numbers. That shouldn't have had any real effect on it, but again, we'll test it just in case. So no, all that's done is change the orientation of the blocks that we were having issues with. Same issue where blocks on opposing sides have different shapes, which is just it just seems so odd. At least these center ones are consistent, I suppose. At least they're doing the same thing, but it seems to be when there's a different right step down or a left step down, that's when the blocks change. If the state is the same, they remain the same, so we know at least it partially works. But it's like changing the block depending on what side it's on. So maybe that in and of itself gives us some kind of indicator, like what side it's facing on, but even that, nothing obvious. So this as far as I can tell is alright as well. That's just rotating the bits around essentially. Like if you think about it from a bit shift perspective, it's just rotating those numbers around in a circle like a carousel, and saying, okay, now these corners are in different positions, let's check them again. Pretty sure it preserves the data within those as well. Since it's inside the for loop, so let's see if my AND statements are kind of valid. I mean, there's nothing, as far as I can tell, wrong with them. So first two are like, oh, if all the corners are the same, just default cube block. That'll be hit on the first pass anyway, so that's fine. Same with the other things, like I guess what we could do, speed things up a little bit, turn these into else ifs. Maybe that has an effect. Maybe there's something that is true in multiple cases. I mean, again, it's probably not the problem, but a small code improvement that we can make, so we might as well make it. It's probably more efficient as well. Then if we hit like this first case, we're not then checking everything else simultaneously. We're only checking -1s and 0s as far as I can tell. All the places that we're checking are the same. We're definitely using double equals rather than the assignment operator. We've got -1, -1, 0, 0, so we've got checking if there's 2 corners raised, we've got checking if there's 1 corner raised, checking if 3 corners are raised, and then checking again if there's no change at all. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we've checked both of these quite thoroughly. Like, I'm almost certain there's no problem there. It's probably something silly to do with how maybe, I don't know, this for loop is working, or even this bit could be the culprit for all I know. Maybe even the way that we're passing around data, but if that was the case, I wouldn't expect some of the results that we're seeing. So, okay, we'll check this again. We're checking in the above position, and we're checking if it's empty. Cool, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. We're checking the below position. We're seeing if it's not empty, if it's resting on something. Yeah, cool, that seems to be working. Or it should work. Definitely got our 4 corners initialized. So it's not like an issue with like memory assignment and like there being garbage data in there. We're looping through 4 times, getting each of the 4 corners each time, and we're assigning that to the I position in the array. Yeah, that seems reasonable. New shape is equal to the old shape as a temp thing. New rotation is equal to the old rotation. Yeah, that's fine. That's just passing the value into those as a default value when we're initializing these. Then passing them in by reference. This is such a weird problem. Like, logically, I've checked everything and I think it should work. Like, it does make sense, at least to me. If anyone watches this at any point and sees something like, oh, that's obviously wrong, then let me know. But yeah, let's check this again. So we've got determine best block for corner height. That's taking in that array that we've got. Also, these as references that we can assign values to them, and then we're using that in comparisons to say if there's anything wrong with them, or sorry, not wrong, but if there's anything different about them, then change the voxel in that position to the new shape and the new rotation. Let me just double check actually that I've got those in the right position. Voxel, shape and rotation, yeah, so those, let me just double check that one as well. Those are almost definitely correct, I think. And since that could also be the issue up here, let me just double check that. Yep, those are correct. They're all in the right place. Okay, so we know that everything for the most part is doing the right thing, it's in the right place, like it flows properly code-wise. And for some reason, it's not working as it should do. It must be some kind of logic error. I must be missing something completely obvious. So let's build it again, and again I will stare at the circle and see if anything stands out to me. Might just be that I've got the wrong offset values when checking each voxel, but pretty sure I've got that right, like checked it quite carefully, so have a look. Obviously there's still that rotation issue, but that's not a problem for now. It's like it's skipping some rows, like these ones. I would expect that to be like a ramp or an inverted corner block at the very least. And it's not doing anything unless it's upside down, which I don't think it is. There's a chance that maybe it's not deleting the old block properly, maybe there's two blocks in here. That could be the issue actually, that could be one problem. Like maybe it's spawning in all the cubes for the circle and then it's not actually removing the old ones properly. But then why would it do it in some spaces and not others? That's another confusing thing. There's no real way for me to test this either. Let me start sticking in some breakpoints, then at least we can test some numbers, see what stuff's going on. Now, if I remember correctly, I debug game editor and then I think it's in debug, I attach it, attach process, there we go. Go down to the Unreal Engine. Hopefully if some of you are having trouble debugging anything in your code, this will give you some idea of how to do it in Unreal Engine, because it is kind of a bit odd, but that's undefined. The source code is different from the original version. Okay, let's see if rebuild fixes that. The rebuilds always take some time. I don't know, I wonder what the issue could be. I mean, I guess it would be an opportunity to get Paint up and see if I can spot anything obviously wrong. Again, let's see if I can attach it. I think I've done it properly. I did this only for the first time yesterday, so wouldn't be surprised if wasn't doing it quite right. But let's play it anyway, if it does it. It might trigger a breakpoint, you never know. In fact, let me quickly look up on the side how to do it. Yeah, so I've done it the way that it says to do it. But it's saying that apparently it won't be hit. That shouldn't be the case. I know that it definitely gets hit because it actually runs this bit of code in the game. Okay, I think it's... Let's try launching it again, maybe? Oh, actually, I might have to do a fresh recompile inside of the editor. Okay, so compile it. More than likely will take its time, but get it going. So what I'll do in the meantime while we wait is I'll get Paint up. We'll bring up our code on one side. And we'll see if we can't like go through it kind of in a more visual way and see if anything's wrong. So let's say we've got our standard standard cube. We want to check this corner, which is corner 1. We check left of it, which is this block here. Excuse me for my terrible my terrible drawings, but we'll live with it for now. Just divide that up, it's a bit nicer. There we go. And I've just been thrown a build error apparently. What is it complaining about? That doesn't look good. It's weird. Maybe it's the mode that I put it in. Or is it because I hit that breakpoint? It should be running this breakpoint anyway. I don't know why it's messing around. Anyway, right, let's go through it, because rather than use the breakpoint straight away, I'll use the I'll use Paint. So where were we? So we're up, no, down here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. So we're checking this block. We're saying we want to check this corner. We check this one because it's left of it. Then we check left and down. Check this one. Yep, that's fine. And then we check just down there. and that is both on the higher and lower pass. Yeah, that makes sense. Now starting here, we take just lower. Yeah, that's for this corner, by the way. Then we're checking positive X, negative Y down there. And then we want just positive X, which is here. Now you can probably guess all we're doing is just going around in the circle basically, but checking each edge twice. Actually quite nice, like as an unintended side effect of that checking process, it gives edges like these immediate edges rather than the corners, it gives them greater effect, I would say, on what each corner does. So let's go down to position 3, or in the array case it's 2. So we're checking to the right, yeah. Then we're checking to the right and up, yeah. Then we're checking just up. I just have to double check my thinking there just in case I was wrong. Then for this final one, just up here. Then to the left and up one, and then just to the left. So yeah, no, there's definitely not anything wrong with this function. That isn't the issue at all. This is so infuriating. Like this problem is it's completely just beyond me for whatever reason. I can't deal with these kind of issues because you never know what the issue is. That's why I need breakpoints, I think. So I'll try and get breakpoints working now that I've checked everything. Right, so we've got the code editor open. I think the most appropriate thing to probably check would be that, but for whatever reason it won't run it properly. It will not. I mean, let's rebuild it, I guess. See if that's an issue. Again. I feel like I've been rebuilding this thing so many times and made pretty insignificant changes every time. But this is the world of programming. I wonder if it's something to do with like the offset value that I'm passing in here. I very much doubt it, but yeah, so we do definitely start on 0, so that's not an issue. And it does start at the case 0. Right, so that's rebuilt. Now it said before it wasn't going to hit that breakpoint, which I find hard to believe, but let's let's attach the process, go down to Unreal. We definitely want the editor. No, it's throwing this error, but that's not related to this code, so we don't need to worry about that. But it's also saying that the code is different from the original version. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's not being hit, because I've tested this stuff and it does work, so that one again saying it won't be hit. It's definitely getting called, because that's always true, so it's lying to me for some reason. I'll go into here. I believe you just press play. Pretty sure you just press play and then it activates the code in the back end. And I should be hitting a breakpoint, but I'm not, and that's kind of worrying. It should, yeah, it should have hit that breakpoint now. Let's try compiling it, see if that makes any difference. Oh, another compile error. You know what, since it won't build, I'll revert it back to... Like, the tutorial that I follow says to use the editor version, but I'm not going to use that, because I'm not entirely convinced that works. Yeah, Dark Title, the white breakpoints aren't active. Like, I don't know why it's deactivating them. I guess it's just the mode I was in. I'll try it using the debug game rather than the debug game editor though, that might fix it. And I'll reattach it to the process. As soon as I do that, that's when it gives me this issue, which is a bit odd. I'll recompile, see if it gives me any issues again. Well, it actually did the compile this time, so that's a good thing. Let's try. There we go. It's working now. So, future reference for myself. Don't use the thing that the tutorials told me to. So, apparently at this point, it's saying the new shape should be 2, and the rotation should be 3. Now, if I think about it in terms of my let's say, if I think about it in terms of my ellipsoid, that is very wonky, but we'll live with it. It'll probably be reaching, well, it'll be going across on the x-axis and up on the y, so it'll be hitting one of these first, I suppose. So I don't suppose I'll be able to see that result in UE4, but if I continue, I'll loop back around again. So new rotation, new shape of 4. So it's definitely changing stuff, which is good. But it's going to be very hard to debug this problem because I have absolutely no idea where my stuff is. But at least, okay, we can look here and at least we know that corner changes has got some data in it. So corner changes is -1, -1 on the end. So if we go down to here, we know that it's run this one. It's looped it around, I think, 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's looped it around 3 times. Found the shape that it's after. And that is supposed to be the shape 4. So that's definitely true. Yeah. So that's actually correct as far as the logic goes, that's fine. Whether or not it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing in terms of this function though, I have no clue. So that bit of the code actually does work. Like, at least I know that it's doing what it's supposed to. Oops. Don't want to open Discord, go away. Let's take off that breakpoint. Stop that, recompile. Let's play it. There we go, it's all built. So let's see again if we can work out what the hell is going on. So I think the first two shapes that we actually saw were the... I don't remember if it said shape 3. I know it definitely said shape 3 for the second one, or maybe shape 4 actually. So let's just double check in the editor. I think those are the two ones that we saw present. So Dark, what I'm trying to do is take the voxel generator that I've made currently and apply an algorithm which I did run through earlier, but I know you weren't here, so I'll quickly explain that. Apply an algorithm that looks at the adjacent tiles, and for some reason it's crashed that time. Okay. Guess I'll just restart it, it's probably just a editor bug. But essentially we're taking the adjacent tile stacks and we're seeing if the stacks are either higher or lower, i.e. is there an incline or is there not, and then choosing the right shape for the for that situation. So you could, for example, have an incline in the corner, but only the corner, and then that would trigger the shape that you're currently looking at to use the, I mean I can't show you it now, but the cube that has the single corner raised on it. And as far as I can tell, the algorithm for doing that, this thing that checks the vertical offsets, all works. So I'll give you a quick example. So we're looking at the left position, corner position here, then the bottom position around that cube, and we're seeing if they're higher or lower in terms of your incline. And yes, the goal is a rounded sphere, but this is a generic this function that I'm building right now is kind of generic so that it can be applied to any brush type that I have. So in other parts of the live streams that I've done, we've made all of these functions which do different shapes. So the most basic one being literally just a single block, and you can place that anywhere in the scene, all the way up to what I'm using currently for testing, which is doing the ellipsoid, this one. And this is what I'm using for testing currently. I've inserted it into the ellipsoid function just to see if I can get it to work. So if we go back to this scene, so I know that it has something in it, or recompile. Hopefully it doesn't crash again, so it's kind of weird if it does, given that it's not crashed before. And no worries, man, I want people to understand what I'm actually doing, otherwise there's not really much point in me live streaming it if nobody has a clue. I just hope I can make it interesting enough for people to watch every now and then. So, as you can see, Duck, what we've got is it just appears essentially to be choosing shapes in a somewhat random order. Like, it doesn't actually seem to have any reason behind what it's doing. Like opposite shapes, for example, this one and this one, they should have the same adjacent cube configuration, but for whatever reason it's chosen a different shape, and I can't work out why. Same for like up here, it should have chosen a shape at least, because there's nothing nearby. But for some reason it hasn't, like it hasn't chosen a shape at all. With the exception of this side, which has decided, you know what, I'm gonna choose a shape, and it's gonna be completely different from what it should be. And then this corner one is for whatever reason the same as the edges, which really shouldn't be the case. This one's closer to what it should be, but spun the other way around. But that's just a positioning thing, that's fine, I can fix that. And so I'm kind of stumped at the moment. The fact that it seems so random is difficult, because it means I can't actually diagnose the problem properly. There's a few other shapes I guess I could test it on, and that might be a bit more helpful. So if I go back to the code, what I'll do is I'll insert this, where is it? I'll insert this function call. Hit the whole thing actually. I'll put it in the variable plane one, that's probably the easiest. So if you look over here, we've got the XY plane, but we want it in the XY plane range, so it's about midway up. This is probably the best place to put it, so place it outside of the for loop. And then replace these with the... In fact, we can just use the Xmin and Xmax that we've got up here, so... Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea actually. What I'll do is I'll use the voxel plane to diagnose it on a flat surface. I think then it'll be easier to look at, and then we'll work from there on individual shapes and see what we can come up with, I guess. Hopefully when I do something flat it will make a bit more sense, but who knows, we'll see. And then we want X max. Sorry if this takes a while. Same for Y max. At least this time it's a little bit nicer than the other function call that we had. And then for the Z, it would be one above and one below the current Z depth. So we'll use this Z variable, Z minus 1, and Z plus 1. So that should be a little bit easier, but now we need to place one in the scene. So we'll make a... We'll make just a standard plane on the XY axis, because then that will cover the whole range that we've actually got. We'll disable the ellipsoid for now. And then what parameters does it want? I think it wants the height. I wish it'd give me the bloody parameter list. There we go, int Z, so we'll give it a height, so let's say it's 10. And then material, we want 1. The shape, we want just 1, which is the default shape, I think. And the rotation, we'll have a 0. Then reformat that, there we go. And then we'll use that same function, but we want the range variant, which we've just made, or rather just updated, I should say. And then we've got the Z, so we want to give it a range. So we'll say between I'd say 10 and 30. Actually, I want it a bit smaller so I can see what's going on. So I'll give it 10, 20, 10, 20. And I want it one higher than the full plane. So that's formatted properly. This will give us at least like a nice visual kind of round representation of all of the different variants around a square at least. I don't think there's anything like any other type of shape that we really need, so let's recompile that. Kind of a really frustrating issue as well, because I wish I could kind of just get on with other stuff, but this is kind of like foundational to everything else, so whoa, big shape, unlight it, there we go. What have I done? I don't think I put the range on properly. Let's double check. Did I put the parameters in the right place? It's not telling me what it wants though. X min, X max. Yeah. Oh, I just did a stick, that's why. Duh. Right, let's do an entire recompile just for that one number. Be a big help if I wasn't a bit of an idiot sometimes. Let's play it. I mean, it's nearly there. That side's working, it's just the wrong way around. That corner's correct, but again, it's just the wrong way around. And God knows what these are doing. I don't know, Duck, can you spot anything that might be kind of obvious? Like, I know it's only doing it on one side. That's, I guess, one clue as to what's happening. It's doing it on one side, and then it's, for whatever reason, replicating the wrong shape over and over again. Yeah, I am getting a lot of corner pieces. Kind of weird. This edge one, this edge here is actually fine. If I leave it like that, just so I can see it quick. Bring up the code window. So go down to where our shape placement is quick, and we want to test the edge ramps. So those are the ones where two corners are raised, which is the bottom one, I believe. Yeah. So if for now, like you suggested, we get rid of all of these other shapes and we only test one. So we're only testing the one shape, we can see if that might be the problem. Yeah, that's what I may be thinking. Maybe it's like overwriting the shape or something with the wrong thing. So if I recompile that. Because yeah, you made a good suggestion, like just trying it with just one shape and seeing if we get different results. So go back up. Okay, that's even more interesting actually. The fact that Only one side is working, that's really odd. And it seemed to be the corner piece side actually, if I remember correctly. Unless I rotated it wrong, like around the wrong way. So only one side is working for placement. Is it maybe that I've put... No, I was going to suggest that maybe I put the if statement like inside the loop so it was only doing it in one direction, but that isn't the case, that's outside. How bizarre. So, okay, so we know it's only working for one side, right? So that would indicate to me that my rotation thing isn't working properly. It also helps that we know what side it's doing it on, and I think that's the left, well, I think it was the left-hand side, so that would mean that, what order was it that it seemed to work on? So it seemed to be left corner raised, right corner not, forward corner not. So it seems to have shifted round 3 times and then decided that this is the right fit. But it's not working on every other pass. That's bizarre. So if we I don't know actually, what could it be? That's alright. I was just explaining that we go into the launch window. It's only working on the left hand side, but it is the right block at least, we know that much. But it's not doing what it should be anywhere else, so it's only doing it on the left hand side, but it is doing it correctly, which would indicate that it's 1001. So it's rotated this 3 times in the for loop, and then it's decided that this is a valid match. Which is odd in and of itself, given that it would, in theory, decide that I don't know, maybe my shape's not aligned properly. Let me run another breakpoint and I can see exactly what data I'm getting in there. So if I pop it there, reattach it. Why does it do that? It's in the right mode. Let's rebuild it again. So the corner offsets is determined by this function here, where it checks each adjacent space. So if I get paint up again, it'll check. So say this is our center cube. Sorry for my poor drawing, but yeah, say that that's our center block. And this adjacent one is elevated, this one's maybe neutral, this one's lowered. It'll take this corner, or this one is the first position, but this is like, say it takes that corner, it'll check. okay, this position's lower than it, this position's lower than it, this position's neutral, so it would then calculate that as -1 in this corner, so it knows that this corner's lowered, basically. And then it'd store that as part of the 4-part array, each part representing one of the 4 corners within this block on top. So we're basically just checking whether or not it should be lowered or raised. So on one side it's actually working. We're just checking through each of the corner positions and finding out what shape pattern is the most appropriate. So this is where 2 sides are lowered, so that's the ramp block, which is shape 4 in our shape ID system. And then once it's had a loop through of this, it'll shift all of the values around, like it'll rotate it 90 degrees, check it again to see if it matches this pattern, and then if it finds that it does, it has an updated rotation, which is like 90 degrees each time. Well, it's 1, but it translates to 90 degrees in the rotation function that we have. So the blocks that we're using to determine the corner values are... It'll check the 3 blocks around that corner, but first it'll check the... First it'll check the one that is up in that position, and it does that for each of the 3 blocks. And it sees whether or not there's actually a material there. Then it knows that the block in that position has something in it, and that that corner should be elevated, or at least it should be incremented. So the next one could be that it's actually not occupied by anything, and then it could decrement. So it's like an average of all of the 4 corners, if that makes sense. This one is an else if to see if there is anything in the space adjacent to it. And then if there isn't, and there isn't something above it, then it knows that there is space to go down next to it, basically. It knows that it should ramp down. And therefore that's why it decrements here. So using this example, it'll just check for this block, this corner, it'll go check this one, check this one, check this one. For this corner, it'll check that, that, that. For this one, that, 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 and this one, that, that, and that. And I've double checked that it is checking the right place, like I've verified it all. I did it all earlier, like went through it very thoroughly and made sure that it's working properly. So this is kind of a puzzle, to be honest, and one that I'm not easily able to work out right now. Because this should work fine, like that shouldn't be a problem. This shifting thing I don't think is the issue, and this loop shouldn't be the issue either. So we've got this breakpoint in now anyway. If I can attach it again. I don't know why it doesn't like that. It's like every time I try and attach it, it says that it won't be hit, even though I know it will be. I know that resetting it like that last time actually helped the breakpoint activate. It's still saying that this won't hit it, but I know it will. So, let's say that this problem let's say if this problem was to do with this rotation thing, which it very well could be. I need to find out what values it's taking in, and I know that I know that it doesn't insert them if they're white. I can't remember what I did before to actually fix it. Did something before and it just seemed to work after that. No, maybe maybe reattaching it might help. That's really weird. That's strange. Try it this way. I think it brings up a separate launcher doing it like this. Sorry, not launcher, separate editor. The frustrating thing as well is I know that this isn't exactly the most like engaging content in the world. Like I wish I could be doing something a bit more exciting instead of hunting down this really elusive like logic error that I can't quite figure out. What do I think the result of the code should be now? So right now it should run. So it should run this part of the code through. It should have like basically run this stuff, come up with a variation pattern for each corner, for each of the blocks that we're looking at. And then it should say, okay, we've got this pattern, does it match this? If not, let's rotate it round and then each time check it against this pattern, and then if it matches, assign the shape to be 4 and the rotation to be whatever the rotation happens to be at the time. So the shape should be a ramp, but the shape should ramp up on all sides of the square that we've made, if that makes sense. So if I play this, so this edge here is fine. That's done what it's supposed to. It's done what I expect. But then it should have done the same thing for each side as well, but it hasn't. So I suspect this probably is to blame, this bit of code here. Yeah, exactly. So we're testing that pattern that we've generated, yeah. And we're saying, let's rotate it around each time and check it against this configuration. And if it matches, then we know that it's that block type, and then we can put that block type in place of it instead, basically. I'm not going to bother trying to trigger that breakpoint. I've done it before, but it seems to be a bit temperamental. I'm going to quickly look up on the side a way to rotate an array. Like, I know it should be a simple problem, and I think I've written it properly, but just in case I've done something fundamentally wrong. So I'm just looking it up at the moment. Oh, what's it done? Finally loaded up something that I think I did earlier. That took its time. Not actually what I wanted though. So you're saying to do array offset plus index mod the mod of the array count. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. Like, I know what the mod operator does, but does it work in C++ though? It's not something I've ever seen before. The offset is the rotation, so you're saying just stick that code straight in, right? Like as you've written it? Is that how you do it, or is there a... Because I can do corner offsets. And you're saying to do the offset which is... Yeah, I don't know how you mean to write that in C++, because I don't think I can just... Like, do you mean do that as a single line, or do that as... It's like all I'm doing here is like shifting everything to one side. Like I'm not doing anything complicated as such. Let's see what I do actually if I put a different configuration in here. If, say, I do instead 0 minus 1, what I'd expect to happen from that is for it to appear on the other side, but it might not do. So, give that a go. Well, it's in the same place. Changed its rotation, so what that tells me is it's not that code. It's elsewhere. It's up here. Yeah, but I'm not finding one rotation because this is in a for loop. So what this is doing is passing in corner offsets as a variable. Then I'm running through. I'm checking against that variable. Then I'm shifting everything, but then I'm looping back round 3 times, checking again each time, and shifting again each time. It may seem like I'm only checking once, but I'm not. I'm checking. I'm definitely checking multiple times, as far as I can tell. And the change that I just made tells me that it is doing that rotation process. Because if I hadn't done that rotation process, it wouldn't have picked up that there should have been a block there at all, and it still put a block in the same place. So what that kind of tells me is that this whole system here is not picking up all of the different corners for some reason, or at least not like checking different edge cases. It's checking it from the left-hand side, but for whatever reason it's not checking other spaces properly, or maybe it's not providing the right index for a block, or it's not updating the block correctly. Looking at this, like, would maybe give us a clue, but this is saying if the block in the X, Y, Z plus 1 position equal to 0. I mean, I could just get rid of that bit of code, I suppose, and see what that does to it. Probably nothing useful, but we'll see. Probably just allow all the other blocks to change direction if they want to. I'm beginning to think actually that maybe it's not an issue with the code that I've written for this particular function. Maybe it's the way I'm referencing something or checking something elsewhere, like in the storage of my blocks. Getting rid of that didn't do anything. Which again is kind of strange because I would have thought that that would have done something as well, but apparently not. This is a bloody irritating issue. So let's double check if I am checking all the blocks quick. So we're going through every single position in both the X, the Y, the Z. And I've double checked the parameters as well. The parameters seem fine. I'm doing my X min, X max, Y min, Y max, Z min, Z max. That all seems fine. The array, the for loop itself. That's definitely checking every space. We've got min, max, min, max, min, max. Incrementing each time, checking the proper boundaries, it's using the proper variable. This one, all that's doing is checking the above space. All this one is doing is checking the below space. What you mean to the change voxel function itself, like this one, or what function is it you're on about there? Hi Flushy. I've been working in C++ for, let me think, probably about 2 years now, I'd say. Doc title, so you're saying the one with the for loop. I presume you mean do you mean determine best block for corner height, or do you mean this parameter list here? Do I think someone can develop a game when his math isn't that good? That depends on whether you're able to learn certain concepts. Like maths wise, I'm not very good with maths. Like, I'll admit I'm kind of bad with it, but I am good with spatial maths. So anything that is like working with 3D grids and stuff like that, I tend to be quite good at that kind of math, and that's the most important math that you come up against. And also rotational math is very important, but other than that, unless you want to get into some low-level technical stuff, you don't really need to be a mathematician, and it's all stuff that you can pick up along the way. There's like plenty of online resources for stuff. Like if ever I get stuck on something, I'll just Google it, to be quite honest. Yes, the one with the commented code. So this one then. Am I passing in the right parameters? Good question. So this one, it's just passing in the XYZ, and I need the corner ID. So for that, I'm changing. So I'm definitely passing in the X, Y, the Z, and I'm also passing in I, which is just 1 through 4 for each of the corners. So yeah, that's getting the right thing passed to it, and then it's putting it in the I position, which again is 1 through 4. So I'm pretty sure that's correct, yeah. No, the other. I presume you meant... Oh, you mean this one? Okay, right. So this one, getting past corner offsets, getting past the reference to shape, reference to rotation. So one thing I'll double check, like you might be right, I'll see if I'm definitely passing back the values that I think I am through shape and rotation. Like I might have done my pass by reference wrong, or my return by reference rather. So let's see, return by reference in C++ example. So returning reference. La, la, la. Yeah, rotation probably isn't wrong. It is actually passing back something, which is good, I guess. Shape doesn't seem to be wrong. I think corner offsets is wrong as well, but you never know. Worth checking everything at this point. No, I don't want return by reference as a thing. I want a reference parameter. So I doubt this will make any difference as it's a very, very minor syntactical change. I don't think spacing matters in this case. Rotation is not wrong, it will still give shape 4 as the result because your rotation code and determine best plot for corner height can't be wrong. Yeah, like we've double checked it. Definitely passing through that by value. Not that that would matter anyway, but... Just for the fun of it, I'm going to see what happens if I change some of these around. Like, it probably does nothing, but I'm kind of at my wit's end at this point, trying to figure out what on earth's wrong, so... See if changing the index position does anything interesting. Probably not. Probably just puts it on the other side of the map, to be honest. Rather than on the left, they'll probably see it on the right. Thanks for sticking with me on the live stream, by the way, Doc. It's nice to have some company for once. And that's not even done anything, that's even weirder. I guess actually that makes sense, because we're only checking the middle two values, so I think I've only reversed them with each other. Let's put E2, let's put 0 in there and 1 in there, see what happens. Because this, in theory, would give a different type, a different shape entirely. So, what I'd expect to see is like a ramp, maybe on one of the corner blocks or something, or no ramps at all. What on earth? That's put it in the same place. Pretty sure you can pass an array by value. I can double check though. I guess that's another valid point, like whether or not you can do that. Yeah, you're right. If it was a pointer, it could make things kind of odd. Like if it's reading it as a... Like if it's not actually dereferencing the pointer. Yeah, I got what you mean. A good point, actually. See if that does it. Well, not only that, but I'm also potentially not referencing the actual data itself. I might just be referencing like the pointer value. I didn't like that. So I'm just doing a bit of reading on the side. You're just saying make it like you do like int pointer, don't you? Like that, and then equal to the dereferencing of that. Is that how I write it? It's like I don't normally mess around with passing arrays. I don't think I've really ever had to do it. So. Alright, let's see if this works anyway. It might be correct, potentially. I have to set each value. Like that, right? I mean, it's not throwing any errors so far, so I can only presume that okay. I mean, that shouldn't matter, like I know it's... Yeah, I guess. Well, let's see. Hang on. If I call that corner offset, just so that it is reading from a different array. Not that it should make a difference, because I mean I was reading from them in exactly the same way up here as I would be down there anyway, and should be getting the same values. See what it's done. It might have done something interesting. Now it's not even reading it at all. Where I write to the array. Well, they're different now anyway. There's corner offsets and corner offset. Or are you saying to read directly from corner offset? Oh yeah. No, I'm done. Yeah, I get you. It's always hard to like communicate code, especially over text, but I appreciate the help. Also kind of dragging on a bit now because like I've been trying to deal with the same problem and explaining the same stuff repeatedly for the last I think 2 hours now. No, that's providing exactly the same result as before. So even the syntax change hasn't made a difference. I've looked it up as well just now, and apparently you can do it the way I was reading it in before, so long as you've like got the size specified ahead of time. I think this is going to be another one of those things where I have to, you know, by the end of the stream I'll have to go off and work on it individually and hopefully seeing it on my own. I might see something, you never know. Yeah. I like somewhat understand how the implementation of arrays are done. It's just when you're writing code, sometimes it's like you don't think about stuff like that. And I know that I've made plenty of mistakes before using arrays and such, but pretty sure this implementation, how I've done it, works. Like syntactically, like I've looked up stuff before, and like in fact there's this link I'll send you. There we go. Like I've used this reference to quickly have a look at how they've passed like a one-dimensional array. If you go down to the example one, and they've done it where they've got a predefined array of size 5. Then in the function parameter list, they've got it listed as an int array with size 5, and then they can reference those subcomponents like individually as you would a normal array anyway. So I don't think that's the issue. I still think it's a logic issue somewhere, but I have absolutely no idea where. I think what I should do is, after today, if I'm still stuck on it, I'll go grab a programmer from somewhere. Don't know where yet, but I'll try and find like a friend of mine or something. Get them to have a look at this code and see if, you know, fresh set of eyes, me explaining it to them in person, maybe that might help. I'm wondering if there's anything else I can do to like test it in a new way. I think the values of corner offsets array are wrong for 3 of the 4 sides. Yeah, no, I agree as well, but I can't work out why they would be. So the only reason I think they could be is when on this bit here, when checking like each relative location, this is where I could see it going wrong. Like this is where I could see, like say checking this corner for example, it doesn't detect the right changes that it's supposed to. If that makes sense. So like one side seems to be working fine, like let's say it's case 0, like that's checking all the correct positions and everything. But even that doesn't really make that much sense, because like it's, again I've double checked it thoroughly, and it'd all just be, this is just corner data, it's nothing to do with where the thing is placed. So maybe it's an issue up here somewhere. So if we have a look, like I just keep on jumping back and forth to different bits of the code, but I don't think I'm using any offsets here. So corner changes, yeah, that's just your array. Then we're looping through each of the, well, we're looping through each of the blocks first of all. Tried without this check, doesn't make a difference. And then we're saying, yeah, for each of the 4 corners, check the height average. And then in this function it should be checking each of the above and adjacent sides, which it seems to be doing for everything. Just going to add these comments in just so it makes a bit more sense if you're watching along. Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing, but I'll go through with you, and I guess you can see if that, like, you can spot anything obvious with going on with what I'm doing, because so this one's front right, I believe, and this one is front left. So if we go through this like step by step, I did this earlier as well, but probably helpful to take you through it too. If we go up to here, we're saying, okay, we want to check the back left, which back I'm going to define as the one closest to you since the axis goes away. Actually, I don't know if that would be front, but either way, definition's not too important, but bear with me. Are you adding one to the X on both front and back? I believe so. So if we have a look, in these functions, they're the same on each. Should I be subtracting for one? So let me run through it with you quick, and we'll you can tell me if I'm doing something silly. Because I've explained this to myself a couple of times, and I can't spot anything wrong with it. But we want to check this corner here from this voxel. So first of all, we want to check X left, like -1 is left, and Y no change. So that would be this block here. But we're checking above it. I can't represent it on this diagram, but we're checking the space above for any like incline in that direction. If there is one, we increment. If not, we check the same position, but we check this block here that's highlighted, and we say if it's empty, then we know it's a decline. Which I think makes sense, like we're using the same coordinates but without the +1 here. So that's just one example, but since the 4 loops are essentially the same, I can now breeze through these indexing positions. We've got to the left and down 1, so that's fine. And then it's duplicated for that. Then we've got just down 1, which is this position. And that's that corner done. Like that seems to be fine. So then we move on to the next corner, which is this one down here, which is this position again, because it's part of this corner bracket. Then we're checking X +1, Y -1, so it's to the right and down, so it's this corner piece here. Then we're checking +x1, which is just to the right, which is here. Then we move on to the next one. X +1, which again is this one. Then we're doing X +1, Y +1, which is right and then up, which is here. Then I've been reading from the right one. So then we're doing Y +1, which is up here. And then finally we move on to the last corner, so we just do the Y +1 again, which is up. Then X -1, Y +1, which is up and to the left. Or rather, I should say left and up. And then finally, we're just doing one to the left. Is the switch parameter right? So this is checking the corner ID. So this is just making sure that we are going through from index position 1 to whatever. Like it's an abstract number. It doesn't actually really mean anything because we're rotating through all positions anyway. We're checking each. We're going through from 0 to 3 in this case, and we're checking 0, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so that should be fine as well. This is why I'm getting so frustrated. Like I've checked everything over multiple times. Logically, seems alright. The only thing I can think of now is that maybe I'm not releasing my block properly, but that worked before, and it works in most cases, and it's not like, I don't know, it doesn't seem to play any factor elsewhere. So this is where our deletion and recreation of voxels is happening. So if we're told to change a voxel at a certain position, we first of all check to see if it's within the world boundaries. That's quite important. And this works fine because I've used this function for everything. This is where all the voxel spawning happens. First of all, we delete any existing references, and all that means is checking if anything exists here, like if anything's addressed. If something is addressed, we destroy that component. And in fact, I should probably include those outside of the if statement, to be honest. But yeah, we see if there is anything in that position, then we destroy it. We reset all the variables for that location. And then, if the material is not equal to 0, so it is a substance and it isn't air, we are creating new things based on the parameters that are passed in. And we're then spawning that model at the XYZ location, which means registering it as a new uStatic mesh component. We register that to the core object, which is this like object class. Then we update its model, update its rotation, update its material. These all work as far as I can tell. And then we're setting its world location to be the XYZ times by like the scaling factors that we've got. And that is how you spawn them in. Like, as far as I'm concerned as well, that works, that's fine. It's given me no issues so far. This update block model thing is just simply a case, like a switch statement with different conditions in it. And even if there was a problem with the index I was using, like I was using the wrong value, it would just give me a different shape. But because it's so inconsistent logically, I can't even test that really, and it doesn't make sense for this to be the problem, so God knows what's happening here. I know I made a minor change, so I'll just recompile it quick. Yeah, I didn't know they'd do anything, so these... I'm just perplexed as to what's going on, really. I mean, you've seen, like, duck title, you've seen all of the stuff that could be the problem, and I've run you through it, and normally if it was a problem like this, I could spot it straight away, or I could solve it straight away, but for whatever reason this one's just evaded me completely, and I think it's to do with some logical component of the code, but I can't find anything. Let me uncomment this. See where it puts those ramps quick. So that's behaving how I expect it to. This one's behaving how I expect it to. So the left and the fourth most corner are working fine. It's the second corner that's not working, apparently. The second and third. So the second and third corners seem to think that the block that they're next to is lower, even when it isn't. So it'd be this one and the one after that. But it seems to be thinking that it is the case when checking next to it here. The material in that case wouldn't equal 0, I know that for a fact. Like, it's as soon as any positives get involved, I think. Like, as soon as we start putting a positive check in on the X and Y, that's when it breaks. Which is very strange. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end the stream fairly soon, unless we can kind of solve this problem within the next, say, 15 minutes, because there's no point in, I guess, us sitting here and hashing this out unless we're actually getting anywhere with it. I think I need some rest. To be honest, I've been staring at this problem and trying to solve it all day. Thanks for the help though, man. I mean, it's good to have someone else there, like, testing it and everything. Like, it's means a lot to, like, have some person on the internet, you know, trying to help out. So, I mean, I could send you code snippets. There's nothing like fancy in here other than what I've already shown. So, I mean, you could if you wanted to. I don't know what the best way to do that would be though. I don't have a GitHub repo or anything like that, so. Do I have to have an account for Pastebin? Let's have a look. I'll have a look then. So I'll keep it simple, comment that back out so that you guys don't have to have a look. Just give me one moment while I set up the Pastebin thing. Right, so let's crowdsource debugging. Get lots of people on it. So if you're on the stream right now and you're interested in having a look at the code that I've got up, I'm just making a link to that now, and then I will send everybody access to it so that you can have a look and we can see if we can debug it together. Because we've been at it all day, me and Duck Title. Well, Duck Title's been with me for some of it, and Yeah, it's tough working out what the problem is, but here's a link anyway. You should be able to access it. Tell me if you're having problems doing so. And if anyone wants me to demonstrate any like functionality of anything and run it, then I will do. Yeah, again, if you're in chat, you're interested in trying to solve this problem, or you just want to have a look at the code, follow that link that I've just put in chat. And if you have any questions about it, or you want to see how it works or anything like that, just tell me, and I can give it a compile. So it's kind of, so far we've not actually really made any progress on the problem. I know that my new system that I've built is a lot more clean, it's a lot more elegant than the one that I ended up building last stream. Like, it's just a bit simpler, makes a bit more sense, and I think it's a bit more robust. And also I've cleaned a few things up as well. But so far, this problem has kind of stumped us a little bit. I'm sure it's some like simple syntax error or something, you know? Something like really obvious, but kind of like needle in a haystack. Because right now we have the pattern creation, pattern matching, and object changing, so should all work. And since you know we're not doing anything like particularly interesting right now, I'll put it back on the ellipsoid again so we can see what it's doing maybe on a slightly bigger scale, see if there's any alterations in how this is actually working when putting it on a different shape. I should probably get one of those like animated trails since I like waving the mouse around so much. I forgot that it lags with this in, so it creates so many objects. Right, here we go. So it is ramping on one side, which is good. Seems to work, but only in select places. That's really weird. Like, it's not consistent at all. There's like no... I'm sure there is some kind of like logical reason, but it doesn't appear that there is. Like, there's no consistency behind what it's doing. I do kind of wish I had like a little character that I could run around on and test things. It's like, okay, so these blocks are correct. That's definitely not correct. I have no idea what that one's doing. Tell you what might be an issue actually. I might not be saving it to the right array space. If this is the issue, I'm going to kick myself in the foot, but let's have a look. So it looks to me like I would have thought that maybe, you know, this isn't like the right index position or something like that, but no, it's I, so it should be iterating, should be looping. What else could it be? Let me think. We've got maybe it's testing the wrong blocks, but me and Duck have been through that thoroughly and seen no issues with that so far. Could be the number shifting, but again we've been through that quite thoroughly and we've tested it and that seems to do its job properly, and if it didn't, some of these ramps wouldn't even spawn in. Like, I'm pretty sure that shouldn't... I don't know, maybe it should be a ramp actually, I think that one is correct. But these should be ramps, these blocks here. Why they're not, I don't have a clue. Because they don't have anything above them. We've got a block below them. Have you happened to like spot anything in the code, Duck, at all? This definitely shouldn't be doing what it is, but seems to like corners for some reason. But only on one side, which is even weirder. It's almost as if it's random where it decides is acceptable and where it isn't. So I wonder if it could be an issue with UE4's processing. Like if it's not doing something in a frame, maybe it's cancelling certain operations. That's weird. Since I can't come up with anything, and I don't think we're going to make any more progress at this point. I think we've done all we can today. I will call it a day now, since we're coming up to 3 anyway. I'll work on it on my own tomorrow morning, see if I can spot anything dodgy and maybe work out how to do some breakpoint tests and that kind of thing. And then I'll come back tomorrow, we'll do the live stream as normal, since it's Friday tomorrow. And hopefully either I'll have fixed it or I'll be one step closer to debugging it correctly, and then we can move on to some other stuff like starting to import slightly different assets, because on the next live stream, if I can, we're upgrading to the artist that I'm working with. He's made a new asset set, so I'll just compile this quick and I'll show you what I mean. So rather than using full cubes as our asset, we're instead going to do things like render culling. So basically if something's visible, or rather if something's open to the air, only then do we want to actually create the component itself. So I might have to rejig some code a little bit, but rather than rendering in a whole cube on its own, and like these shapes that we've got, instead they'll be deconstructed into a top component, edge components and so on, and then those will be placed in the scene where appropriate, basically if they're exposed on that face to air in some way. And hopefully that should improve performance massively, because then we're only putting into the scene objects that are strictly relevant. So that should be quite an interesting little experiment to do, and you shouldn't have as many headaches with that. Because it is purely just like manipulating the models themselves and just doing a bit of stuff like that. What I'm very confused about, actually, like looking at this now, is why when ramping up it stops at this top block. Now that seems to be really weird. Like if it's not the top block in the chain, it just seems to stop. Although it works here and it works there. Anyway, right, enough of that, because I'm just rambling at this point. Yeah, we're going to cut it there. I will, I guess, see you guys again same time tomorrow, probably about 2 o'clock. Feel free to jump on whenever. Hopefully I'll have made some progress and I can fill you guys in as you trickle onto the stream. I notice I've got a few viewers this time. If you're new to the stream and you want to follow along with what I'm doing, which is basically building a game from scratch, please follow. Like, it would mean a lot if you could. If you followed already, then great, and I'll try my best to make some more progress. Hopefully we'll get somewhere, but I wouldn't say it's been fun today, because it hasn't. It's been quite stressful, but it's at least been, like, you know, progress. We're still making progress, so that's the important thing. So see you later, guys. Thanks for sticking with it, even though I know it's been a bit of a boring time, and I will see you tomorrow.